Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, discover your core values and let them direct your life. My experience is most everyone thinks they know what their core values are. And in truth, very few actually do. And due to this, we find ourselves doing things that are not fulfilling us and not engaged with what does fulfill us. Amidst that, we can often grow just frustrated, even bitter, or fairly apathetic and just going through the grind. So I brought someone on the show to hear his story of going from not understanding his core values to getting very clear on them. I think it'll help you better understand what core values really are and how to get clarity on yours and then adjust your life accordingly. So Robert Glazer. He was walking aimlessly through school with his drive somewhat disengaged, as you'll hear him say. He decided to travel abroad and there found his interest, an interest kind of in business, but it was outside of the school walls that he had been in to that point. He started learning the ropes, but it was still later that he found a desire to really get clear on his values. So he spent 6 months just working on it, getting clear on what are his key core values. And for himself, he came up with 4. You're going to hear those. When he discovered them, he says the next 15 years were just full on fantastic. And he founded a global marketing agency. He started an inspirational newsletter called Friday Forward. It reaches about 200,000 subscribers right now worldwide. He hit the #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller list as author of several books, including Elevate. And now he's host of the Elevate podcast. His show is actually very similar to this What Drives You podcast. He has similar guests and he does look at literally what drives them. Now he has a bit more of a business focus. So if you like this show, I think you'll really like his show. Again, it's Robert Glazer and Elevate. So I really encourage you to check that out. You can also find him at Robert Glazer, GLAZER.com, and sign up for his Friday Forward newsletter. I've been getting that for weeks now. I think you'll really enjoy it. Hey, when I'm not having these conversations on human potential, I'm working directly with people on their human potential. You can connect with me at kevinmiller.co. Here are a few sponsors. They make the show possible. Then drive with me as I talk with Robert Glazer and talk about discovering your core values and letting them direct your life. Let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Well, Robert, I have been talking about your podcast and enjoying hearing we have a lot of overlap guests, but you have a bit more of a business focus, but at the end of it, I just find a lot of resonance. And with people like you find out, I want to know what drove you, which is the name of the show, obviously, and my book, and what brought you to this point. You know, you came here, you did some stuff, you did some business, and then now you're in this seat wanting to influence people. And honestly, I found myself wanting to go back a bit and go, what was some of the thread that brought you to this place today?
Yeah, I'm not that different. I know we'll probably get into sort of a talk on values at some point. And you know, for me, part of the discussion with people on that is inevitably some formative experience or some childhood experience or go back that sort of, you know, had, you know, led them to where they were today. And so that's true for me too. I was, you know, looking back, I don't think I fully understood this until I was probably 30 something years old. But looking back, I was a very entrepreneurial, creative, ADD kid who was not super well served by the, hey, sit down and be quiet and follow directions, education system. And I, you know, because of that, I sort of never really connected that I love to learn. And because I was doing my own thing. I didn't like what I was kind of learning in school. And I was sort of, one of my speeches, I read all my report cards from kindergarten to 6th grade. They're eerily similar. They all sort of like, he seems smart and capable, but we can't really get him to do anything. So I was kind of very much an underachiever and felt like at a place in that I just knew I could do more, but I wasn't motivated to do it, and sort of no one had showed it to me. And then somewhere sophomore year in college, like I did fine enough, you know, to get by. but now as my kids learn a whole bunch of things, I'm like, I kind of never learned that at the time. Something just flipped. I went abroad. I learned that I loved business. I loved marketing. I was finally done, how many years into school at that point? 14 years of school with the required, courses, and I could do what I wanted, electives. And I ended up sort of getting all A's in everything I took because I was super engaged in it. And again, I fell in love with business. I fell in love with marketing. And eventually, when I started to really have some experience working for great leaders and I did my sort of best work, I kind of fell in love with leadership. So when I was building an organization years later, after I became kind of unemployable to other people, I started to really think about how we wanted to build that organization, how I wanted to do it differently, and sort of attack some of the standards or status quo of things that I really didn't like in the organizations that I had worked for, and sort of found a voice in my writing, first in our industry, in sort of our partner marketing industry, and be able to kind of share thoughts and mix things up. And then eventually in sort of leadership and the things that we were figured out, my sort of why is to find a better way and share it. So inevitably I wanted to sort of do some thought experiment, see if it worked. And then if it worked, figure out how to share that with other organizations. And as I was saying to someone earlier today, I think what I eventually realized is how much of a diminishing impact kind of poor leadership can make, early in our lives to later. And, what a vicarious circle looks like of good leadership. And, the government's not going to solve anyone's problems. And I think I've just really come to appreciate that, if we can develop leaders and organizations, like that's where our solutions are going to come from. And you look at the kind of like a coaching tree in the NFL, right? That goes on forever, like the Bill Parcells tree. You look at like a really good leadership tree and how much impact that can have across people and organizations. And that's just what I became interested in.
Go back, your story of kind of going along, doing the school thing, not super motivated. And then you said, went abroad and something clicked. I mean, that speaks to the drive that I talk about, that it's not that some people are born with drive, some are not.
Oh, I was not born.
I'd say you had it in there, but I'm wondering.
I had it in there, but it was like
happened and boom,
it was not used. And
fair enough. It isn't.
We can have a whole other discussion where then I think after that I redlined it for the next 15 years, and that had its own consequences too. And so I'm trying now in my late 40s to go somewhere in the middle of those two stories.
What was it though, when you look back, that took you from saying, I'm not really, my drive isn't engaged, let's say it's in neutral, and then going, and you start going forward?
I think I found the it was a 2x2 matrix. It was like stuff that I like when I started studying some of the business stuff and the marketing stuff, it was very natural to me and I was good at it. Right. So I think we're all looking for our vocation. And I think I sort of, I went into a place where I was good at it and I wanted to learn about it. And I was sort of motivated to master it and to figure it out. If you looked back, you would say, this kid's an entrepreneur, right? Like if you look back in retrospect, you'd say he was always doing this business or that business. And, but like a lot of kids, I emulated my dad. My dad was a lawyer, so I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to college thinking I was going to be a lawyer. So it wasn't anything that he put onto me. Like it was just sort of like a kid wanting to be like his dad. And try, like he probably would have been like, no, don't do this. And so like, but when you looked at, I was selling candy in, 10th grade and going on the train and reselling it. And then when I went to college, I would take my stuff down and rent trucks and do it for everyone else. And then I organized the school trip and I got one free. And so it was just sort of like, duh, this is what you're good at. this is what you like. But that really wasn't in my curriculum until 14th grade. Which is kind of a shame. And one of the things I talk about is sort of, and no one ever sort of double tapped me until probably got out of school and had some business leaders that, hey, here's here's what you're really good at. You should double down on this. I don't know if you know a gentleman named Dave Rendell. He wrote this book called The Freak Factor. He's like 6'6" and super ADD and wears all pink. And, he is on my podcast, and he said a line. He said, my whole life I was told to sit down and shut up in class and be quiet. And now I stand on stages and talk all day and make a lot of noise. And if someone had told me that was a career that you could make a living at 10 years old, I would have been like, that. I want to do that. Like, like I'm made for that.
Okay. This is, you're talking about education. So we're very similar in that.
Yeah, this is not a unique story. I've heard many people tell similar versions.
It's not, but sometimes I don't think that we get into it, and we still have these perspectives around it because, I'm talking to some of my kids now, and some of them are entrepreneurial. Some of them are not. I got a couple really going after the academic arena. And this came up recently. One of my kids was talking, and I said, gosh, totally in support of his academic pursuit. He's doing really well and is gearing towards college, following his brother. If I went back though, and this is my question for you, if I went back, I slept through a majority of high school. I didn't show up. There was one kid in my huge school that missed more days than I did. If I could go back, and I'm not saying this to espouse it, I'm just curious with you doing that. If I could go back, I'd have dropped out. I had business happening. I was racing bikes. It was a total waste of time for my trajectory. Yeah. And I'm wanting to help my kids figure out, what do you want to do? And if that's not the direction, you want to waste time, in school? Now, I'm not having my kids drop out of school necessarily, but it's been curious to me as I look at that, as I look at kids going very different directions. When you look back, do you look at it and go, there was some value, or it was a total waste of time? And if somebody had shown me this opportunity, man, I'd have just gone full tilt right then.
It's interesting. I have some regret, and we're driven by that, in that, like, now that I know what I wanted to do, and when I'm part of a nonprofit that does this, it's called Build. It teaches a entrepreneurial curriculum as an extra course in the school. And the kids in the school that do this graduate, and these are schools that are resource challenged and in, more difficult neighborhoods. They're in the same thing otherwise, but they do so much better in the rest of school because it's kind of like they have context. Oh, writing, like I've got to write my business plan, or this, or public speaking, I've got to sell the product. And I actually think that, like, if I had had some context for why I was learning this stuff, I would have been more engaged or saw how it fit into my worldview, because now I find myself going back and wanting to understand some of the stuff that I wasn't interested. It was almost, as you said, like the learning. This is what I try to stress in my own kids, and they are each different. But I remember one of my kids had like an 8th grade teacher or 7th grade teacher. They said, look, they're not going to remember what they learned in this class. They're not. I just want, and this was like a super young teacher, and was much better than all the old curmudgeonly teachers, because he said, I just want them to remember that they learned that they liked learning history with Mr. Davies or whatever he said. And I was like, that's like, and that's what I think about my kids. Like, I think that if you help them understand what they enjoy, then they'll like to learn, and then they'll have context. Look, science, there isn't a science gene in there's a lot of marketing. There isn't a science gene going back like 4 generations. The only doctor in my family is through marriage, and that through my brother. We are not a science DNA family. So that whole part is like, it's just not, I'm not good at it. I don't get it. It doesn't excite me. So yeah, but I do think you need a little bit of exposure. I like Angela Duckworth's kind of grit rule, which is like, anything you try that you're just doing it until you get some confidence, you're probably not going to like it. So I think you got to learn to like try it and see if you like it. But once you're like, this isn't for me, then you should kind of move on to the next thing. So for some people, right, there's no interest in that. But in what I'm doing now, which is combining sort of real world programs and sort of academic ideas into frameworks, some of that more traditional learning stuff and history and things are would be helpful for me.
It is funny. I used to just complain and really diss history. You mentioned that. And yet I spend a majority of my time reading books from dead people at this point, spiritual books.
Right. Trying to learn from it and best practices. I will say, like, I went to a private school that I didn't have like the best of experience or class or otherwise, but and this is true for my son. One goes to private and two go to public. But writing, like making me a better writer, I really attribute to that school and the smaller environment. And, that was one thing I really came out with was, good kind of writing hygiene.
Yeah, man, I've got a kid right now, and he's in an alternative school, and they got a business class, and he's doing investing and finding out how much he loves investing. And they're doing this, kind of mock stuff. And he says, yeah, I made like $6,000 last week. I was investing in Google and I invested in this. I'm like, man, it's not my forte, but more power to you.
Yeah.
I love that the school's
this
opening.
Real world stuff. Like my daughter is a dual major in history and business in college. And just when she talks to me about, she loves history and stuff. When she talks to me about the case study stuff that they do in business, in the real world, and her grade was based on pitching for money, last week for an idea, and whichever teams got the most money from the case study method is a great way to learn and critical thinking and real world and get your hands dirty. They also had some whole project they did in 8th grade around having to figure out like how you would live and a budget and all that stuff. It's great that we teach all this theory, but we should also teach some practical stuff. The fact that kids graduate with no basic personal financial acumen and then go sign $200,000, loan things and leases and otherwise is crazy. We make fun of home ec, right, as soft and gym, but most, a lot of people they can't cook, they're unhealthy. Like when certain things become a lot more important as you become an adult.
All right, on this tangent of school and to what you said when I asked you the question about what kind of triggered your drive, you said you found something you were good at, but I think you also added on that you were good at and you enjoyed. I separate those a lot, especially if we're looking at the things that, people are wondering what they're supposed to do. We often gravitate towards that thing of, oh, you're good at that and you're good at that and you're good at that. And I bristle a little bit because along the way, I found a lot of things that I was good at, I did not enjoy. And I see the
this is the icky guy, right? What you like, the concept of icky guy, right? What you enjoy, what you like, what the world needs, and what you get paid for, right? It's like the four quadrants, and you're trying to find the middle. Yeah.
And so here you are. You said you found something good and you enjoyed it. I want to not to jump. I don't want to jump forward. I'm going to stay back here. But when you're looking then at values, I mean, that's where I find that's the thing that you'll devote yourself to. You may be good at this, but if you can attach your value.
Well, that was the second transformation for me.
Okay.
The first one was 20 years old, going abroad, living abroad. I think every student should be forced to go abroad. Like I won't pay for my kids' college unless they go abroad or get out of the bubble. Kind of coming back and having some of that work experience and travel experience. And I read Atlas Shrugged and books, overnight on trains and all kinds of stuff. The second was really in my 30s. I had started the business. I had a modicum of success. I was doing better. And well, let me, I'll time splice this. 5 years ago, I was, giving a speech and someone was reading my bio and I had this revelation. It's like every single thing they read in my bio is from after this sort of, demarcation point at 30, whatever, 4 years old when I went to this leadership retreat. And it was interesting. And at that retreat is where I came out, and it was with Entrepreneurs Organization. It was like 25 people from all around the world, led by this man named Warren Rustan, who's kind of an incredible mentor to a lot of people and leader. And I thought it was like, hey, how are we going to figure out like what all these leadership tools, like speaking and this and managing and otherwise. And the first 2 days was like and it was designed to like exhaust us and wear us down, but it was just this big mirror. And it was like, who are you and what do you value? And like figure that out, because that's going to be the foundation of your leadership. Now, interestingly, it was a little like Simon Sinek's best-selling book, like, discover your why. Like, great. Like, now what? Like, go figure it out. It's not that easy. So I was like, wow, I think I have really strong values. I'm not able to articulate them. I spent the next 6 months kind of going on a journey to solve that and figure out my personal core values. And I was able to come up with really these kind of 5 values. And I went back, and once I had that clarity, I made a lot of changes in my life and my business and what I doubled down on and what I stopped doing. And that was the cooking with gas. So I think from then it was just like a hockey stick, probably again, then way overdid it, went into, because it was all working at that point. And because you have that pain of underachieving, right? The solve to that is just to overachieve. And so I just overachieved for a decade and almost killed myself like doing that.
All right, we'll come back to that. Now go back to the 6 months though. So you go to this retreat, they make you look at yourself finally, thank God, because never, nothing else in the culture really does. So here's the big transcendent moment in essence. And then you said you spent 6 months. What did you do during those 6 months? What were the resources? What were the
because I was like, okay, so how do you figure out your core values? Like I'm sold on this, and it was a little, like I said, it was the book like Discover Your Why. Like everyone loved Simon Sinek's book, but it's not that easy to just go do. And I found keyword lists and otherwise, but I just didn't find anything. And so I sort of like figured out a process. I went through some trial and error. I made these lists. I kind of tried them out. And then eventually I was like, yeah, this is it. And then if you fast forward, to me, that was so unlocking that when we started doing leadership training at our organization, one of the first things I did was I spent half a day with all these new leaders. I'm like, we're going to figure out your core values. Because you have to lead. We can tell you how certain things and how we want you to lead in our organization. But if you talk about Jim Collins' sort of level 5 leadership, that's from a deep place of authenticity and self-awareness. And you are going to be the best leader, understanding your values and how you want to lead. This stuff is baked in, it's hardwired. So either it can be an asset or a liability. And the only difference is whether you're aware of it. So after like 3 or 4 of those classes, I had to try to take what I did and turn it into a process. And I got it into a pretty good, repeatable process and sort of course curriculum. And I sort of had the Simon Sinek moment because when I wrote about it in my book, Elevate in 20, I think it was 18 or 19, I was like, I kind of wrote about how important figuring out your core values was, but I gave people some of the breadcrumbs or the things that I had found, the resources, but I didn't have it all together. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years later when I ended up kind of coming up with a course, because everyone's like, okay, so how do I do this? I'm like, well, I could spend an hour with you, but that's not really scalable. But it was through training about 100 leaders and taking them through it and being like, I can help people figure this out. I figured out the kind of questions and the process and how to label them and how to make it action oriented. And a lot of that borrowed from sort of business values and business kind of logic around thinking about, and we went back and updated our core values at work. Not that they matched my personal core values, but they were fewer and they were narrower. And I could point to a lot of like programs that we instituted in our company that were very aligned to my core values. You're not looking for, it to be identical in business, but obviously like the company is going to have the sort of values of the leader, something like it. And then you're going to want to find people who sort of share those values. And in any organization, you have to have you can have as much diversity as you want, but you need to have some shared values and principles. That's the whole point of why that organization exists.
So come back to your core values, personal core values. I mean, as you know, that's a primary focus of mine and really the agenda of my book, What Drives You. But when you look at that, and especially if you look, you're talking about leaders. So I think if you take most anyone who's an aspiring, striving person, our demographic who listens to the podcast here and say, oh gosh, you should know your value. Oh yeah. Do you know your core values? I think most of them gut reaction say yes. And then I
always say out of 100 people, 2 say yes and know the answers. 5 say yes and then stumble through some sentences, and the other 90 are like, no. Like, but the gut reaction is, of course, I know my values. You say, I'm honest. So what are they, right? And then they're like, well, kind of like, here's how I describe it. The analogy: imagine you have a really a couple of things. I think core value is the ultimate decision-making rubric, in your life. And so for it to be a good decision-making rubric, you need clarity on that. And I talk a lot about in the book that'll come out later this year is really about this notion of the big 3, which I think your relationship, your partner, your community, and your vocation or place of work, like if those aren't core values aligned, they have a very little chance of working in the long run. And the difference between being like, yeah, I have values and I know I do, and not is this. If you have a really nice sports car and that sports car is in a tunnel, and now imagine there's yellow lines on both sides and sort of walls. Now I turn off the lights and I tell you to go to the other side of the tunnel. Well, you're going to drive, you're going to not see the line, and you're going to hit the wall, and it's going to make a terrible sound and screech. And you're going to drift back to the middle, and you're going to overdrift then to the left side, and you're going to do it again. And you're going to get out of that tunnel alive, but your car is going to look like, and it's because you didn't see the warning signs of your values, and the wall was sort of crashing. We all know when our values are crossed. In fact, that's one of the tests I do is sort of the opposite. Like if the opposite makes you cringe, when I think I know someone's value and I describe an opposite avatar of their value to them, like their face gets tight and they're like, no, I can't deal with that person. So what I'm doing is like you turn on the lights and then you drive through the tunnel and then you see the yellow line and you don't go near the yellow line and then you stay away from the wall. That's the fundamental difference in having the clarity or not having the clarity. We all know we know what it feels like when we cross our values, right? It feels horrible. It feels like that car hitting the wall. But we can't articulate that yellow line. We don't know how to avoid it.
So then my assumption is that's the analogy that what you just gave. You were so you found some core values, some aspects of them.
I knew I was very value driven, right? I knew I was very clear when my car was getting beat up or when I was happy or when I was I knew it, but I couldn't articulate it to make it useful.
And that's the 15 years of redlining.
Well, no, no, about half of that time was once I figured it all out, it was like, let's drive the car at 400 miles an hour, which isn't sustainable either. So I actually, I'm not sure I can blame then on that. I think that was still okay, like I'm gonna overdo it. So, it was a sense of one of my why and the number one core value is find a better way and share it. And I use these Gary Sanchez why archetypes. People who find a better way, like they're inherently, often, he said, often pleased, but never satisfied. So that is an endemic, problem with sort of that value and that why is learning. It's almost a meta thing you have to learn that if you try to make everything better overall, it won't be better. Right. So I had to sort of figure out my way through that. I mean, I know that I tend to exhaust my wife and family and people I work with sometimes just trying to keep improving everything.
That quote, often pleased but never satisfied, that's a struggle. I've used the word content, that I'm striving to be content. I don't really want to be satisfied, but I don't want to be constantly exhausted and displeased with myself. Fair?
No, most entrepreneurs actually, a lot of people have this sort of why or this key value of wanting to improve. And again, for me, it's that overcompensation of, needing that or wishing I could have done that. And when I work with leaders on this, it's trying to explain to them, like there's some who are inherently great problem solvers, right? And they've become terrible micromanagers because they're solving when everyone's coming to them to solve their problems. I'm like, look, you need to change your reward center from being a problem solver to creating a team of problem solvers, because that will meet your need to solve problems without creating this problem. So similar for me, I have to understand that the way to make holistically things, it's winning the better war versus the better battle, right? And kind of keeping that sort of mindset.
I'm curious so you found these values.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share them if that's helpful, because also I think how you express them makes them, you can look at them and say, I'm doing this, I'm not doing this. You can kind of do a report card.
Please. Yes, please.
So my dominant one is find a better way and share it. Health and vitality, self-reliance, respectful authenticity, and long-term orientation. If I sort of trace back to those report cards and 6-year-olds, and I actually have a joke I did with my team where I took my write-up from when I was 5 years old in preschool and changed the word Bobby to Robert or whatever. And I told everyone it was 365 feedback that I got. I changed some of the terms and everyone's like, oh yeah, that just totally sounds like you. Like, And then I sort of lined it up against the values, and they were laughing hysterically when I showed them it was literally 5 years old in preschool, and they were saying he likes to work on his own projects and do his own thing, and and he'd rather tinker with things and the cause and effect, and there's the find a better way, and he looks out for the other kids in his class, and he takes care of them, and it was just, actually they should have won some sort of award for the analysis that they wrote. So these, if I look back, these have been there for a long time in different parts of my life. But I'm also, it's interesting, like long-term orientation. So since COVID, and I'm not running the day-to-day, I was getting really frustrated. And one of the things was, like, what I always did was I had a number two who ran the business day to day. I liked being the R&D department and focus on what we're going to do next year and the year after. And he and I had a great relationship, doing that for a long time. And then after COVID, particularly in our industry, it was just such yin and yang. Every board meeting, every 6 months, there was a new issue and too much supply and too much demand. And like, we had to focus so much on the short term, which is just not what I like to do. Like, I like to work on these bigger, longer term. And I was able to see that, like, I was having a hard time. I was really frustrated and burnt out because I wasn't making things better. My health, from COVID was sort of challenged, and, that value. And then it was just not a long-term orientation. Like, I was forced to operate in sort of like day-to-day combat, which is not my preferred method of operation.
Let's look at each one.
Yeah.
Find a better way and share it. That is, to break that down, finding a better way. I think a lot of people would say that, that sure, we're going to find a better way.
Right. But the shared is the unique part to me. Like,
it's not for everybody. I see some people who find a better way and they go do that and they, knock it out of the park.
They patent it and sit on it and mine it. Yeah. The enjoyment for me is crowdsourcing it, basically. Okay. Yeah.
Well, just that, being clear on that. That's why
I'm on this that's why I'm on this podcast, right? Yeah. Like, hey, can I share some ideas that'll help you or your team or your organization? And that's inherently, like, if you talk about what fills my bucket is when I get emails from people I don't know all around the world saying, I heard this podcast, I read your newsletter from your Friday Forward. This made a huge difference for me today. It helped me do something better for myself or my team or my organization. Like, that's what kept me writing that newsletter, 10 years later, was getting those sort of notes. I certainly wasn't getting paid to write it.
On that note, you had been doing the blog for a good while before the podcast. Yeah.
Yes. I started the newsletter Friday Forward before the podcast, which was sort of how I built up this audience of people that I did not know from all around the world. And that just started actually as a note that I shared with my own team. So it actually came out of that same leadership retreat that I did, which we talked a lot about morning routine. And one of the, they had us actually practice this morning routine of getting up, and Hal Elrod's got his miracle morning. This is a shorter version, kind of a 10-10-10. So 10 minutes of silence, 10 minutes of writing, and 10 minutes of sort of reading something positive. And the sort of chicken soup for the soul stuff wasn't for me, or some of the, books and quote books. And so when I got back, I was like, I like that routine. I actually have a bunch of these quotes and stories that I've saved. Maybe I'll sort of merge this, and I'll spend some time writing in the morning and try to find like a story or a lesson that I could share that's positive or motivating. But I called it like spicy chicken soup for the soul. It wasn't, it was sort of intended to push you a little bit or make you think or challenge an assumption. And I started sharing it with our remote team of 40 people for a couple months. And I wasn't sure if anyone was reading it, but it was a good habit for me. I was writing it. And then I would start hearing, I shared this with my wife, or I shared this with my husband's company. And I was doing them all on BCC, and I didn't have any. Someone was asking me about an old one that they had forwarded. And so one week I was like, and I was at a conference of entrepreneurs, and I was saying, look, I've been doing this and this newsletter, and I have a remote team, and people seem to really like it. And I make it not about our business. And a couple of them, great. Well, send it, 4 of them, send it to us, add us on the list. So I added to them, and one started his own, and the others were like, this is great. Well, we'll just send this to our teams on Friday after you send it to us. And I had called it a bunch of different things: Friday motivation, all this stuff. And so one day I was like, all right, like maybe other people would like this. Who knows? I can't do all this BCC stuff. People are asking me to add someone. I don't have so I bought a $25 WordPress site and I sort of made a directory of all the old ones. And then I got a newsletter thing, but I made it just plain text, but just so it could manage it and so people could sign up. And I took like 200 friends and families and colleagues and I put them on the list and I was like, they're all going to hate me. Like, cause I didn't tell them what this is. And I renamed it Friday Forward because people were forwarding it and I sent it. And the same thing started happening. I started hearing from people share with their company. 3 months later, a guy in Inc. magazine wrote, this is the only newsletter I read every week. And I woke up like 18 months later and there's like 100,000 people in 100 companies opening this newsletter. And so that's sort of what got me into some the writing, and that led to my first book, Elevate. I tried to write a compilation of all the Friday forwards. Publishers didn't like compilations. One of them said, we don't like compilations, but I think there's a story behind these posts and why they resonate. And I've gotten such interesting comments from people all around the world that I've never met.
I like the testimony, Robert, and want people to hear that you did it because it was a desire you had. It wasn't. So for everybody who just heard that and go, oh, I should do that. Well, hold on. Because I want them to hear your story. You did it because you were doing it already. It was authentically coming out.
And you're cued into that because 5 months later or a year later, when it's taking off and my business is busy and it's separate, and they're like, why don't you incorporate this into our blog? I was like, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm spending all this time. I was like, should I keep doing this? Like, and the answer was basically, this aligns with all my core values. This is about helping people find something better, learning how to rely on themselves, stories of respectful. They were all kind of stories of this capacity. But so my decision not to quit was, I don't understand how this aligns with my work or life or whatever, but this is so aligned with my core values. And by the way, fast forward 10 years, the books I've written, the podcast, none of that would have happened without it. So that's the example of saying, I'm going to double down on something, even if I don't know how or if or what it helps, but it's the stuff that's aligned with your core values is the stuff that you like do at 11 o'clock at night and time flies. The stuff that's not is the stuff that you do it for 5 minutes and you feel like someone's stabbing you, right? It required work, but it wasn't hard. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed what came out of that. And I would have never had those books. I never would have had the podcast. I never would have had a lot of speaking and the stuff that I do today, because it was outside of my little marketing agency world.
Well, I want to point out too, what you just said, you were doing it for free. When people are looking at, especially the content world these days, podcasting and writing and whatever, because I see this sometimes from people who I want to do a podcast. What should I do it on?
Yeah. Oh, I had the same discussion because I was in affiliate marketing. That was my agency. And, affiliate marketing was really exploded. And as people say, and I actually was an affiliate before that. And I started a site of all, I was the guy that people used to always reach out to. They knew they did the research. What TV should I buy? And then we had kids like, can I get your baby registry list? So I created this thing. It was called Bobby's Best at the time. And it was like the one best thing in every category. Again, that sort of took off. I didn't know what was going to be, or how I was going to make money on it. But later, so it was very successful. And then I figured out how to monetize it. People were sharing it afterwards. People would say to me similarly, like, I want to be an affiliate. Like, what kind of site should I start? And I was like, it kind of doesn't work like that. Like, this guy loves grills and he started a grill site 4 years ago. He built up a huge trust and grill following. And then he figured out how to partner with Weber or otherwise. Like, I can't tell you what to get excited about and wake up every day. And we talked about this, I think when you were on my show. I did a book tour 3 or 4 years ago, bunch of podcasts, bunch of big names, and some of the folks that you and I know. And when I had my next book 18 months later, I reached out to all of them, get back on their podcast, and half of them didn't have podcasts, anymore. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people, they're motivated. It takes a while, like James Clear has written, and you got to just put it into the world, and it takes a while before you get anything back. So if you're doing it because you're looking for it to grow your business, or you're doing it for some reason that's not pure or related to the cause, like for me, I always say, look, I'm having, for most of the folks, the 1 hour conversation that I'm going to have with someone that I've admired in my life. And that's enough. Like that's enough for me to make me want to get up and in fact, when I've had a couple guests who are total duds, or I shouldn't have, like, I knew I shouldn't have, like, I'm not excited for it. And so I stopped doing that and taking chances. But a lot of folks I know who are doing it, I think for the wrong reasons, they all eventually quit because it didn't produce what they were looking for.
My reasons for the podcast are purely selfish. I get to talk here for an hour with you, and I'm not getting charged for it. It's brilliant. I love it. It's interesting. There's a movie. I don't know if you know. I haven't heard a lot of people that know it. It's called The Music Within. It's based on a true story. It's a
good title. But my next book's called The Compass Within, so I like that title.
Well, this is The Music Within. It's based on a true story of the guy who started the American ADA, American Disabilities Act. But the dude was really good. Back to school. He's in school and he just kills it as a speaker. He's really good. And he's like, okay, I'm the best, right? He says to the professor, and the professor axes him finally and says, no, you go away. You're good at speaking, but go away and come back when you have earned an opinion about something. And he ends up going to into the military and into war, and then has something he cares about. Even that, going back to, you're good at something. Yeah. Obviously, you had some skill at communicating all this time, at writing or whatever, but that wasn't what got people proliferating it. It was because you're writing about things you care about, and it resonated with people. You're good at it, and you care about it. Fair?
Yeah, and I think, look, particularly writing sort of rewards putting stuff out there and longevity. I remember reading James Clear's stories. Like, I wrote these articles for 7 years and no one read them. And then finally they're indexing 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 years later as people started to know who I was. And then he wrote one of the most successful books of all time that sold 10 million copies in Atomic Habits. But it was sort of a 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, and then the hockey stick is there. So you've got to put in the work, I think, long before you see any of the rewards in a lot of things. And you don't mind putting in the work if it's really values aligned, if time flies, if you're enjoying it. I think that's what we're all trying to do, is figure out, getting that combination of what am I good at, what am I enjoy, what does the world need, and what will people pay me for?
Yeah. I'm on a couple podcast groups, like on Facebook, that I've been on just to like ask a question about a conference or something. And I'll see that, hey, I started a podcast. I've done like 40 episodes and now I'm not sure what to talk about. What should I do? Stop the podcast. It's not something that you can do long term. So finding that thing, which.
Right. And most of those people started it for their business, right? Yeah. They started it, I think, thinking it would generate, they're an accountant and let's talk about accounting. There's some accountants that go, let's talk about accounting all day long, and they'd be so excited. Mm-hmm. And you probably will get a lot of business from it, but it's, I don't know whether it has to be the opposite. You have to be so excited to have that conversation, even if you never get business from it.
So that was all on your first core value. The second one, I think you just labeled health and vitality.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Tell us about that.
And this one's interesting in terms of, cause we did some family values with our kids too. And, I've always believed in trying to, I think it goes to self-reliance a little bit too, like be healthy, and feel good and not do things that took away from that. And what's interesting was that was great, my 20s and 30s. And now I've getting into my 40s and I've had some actual health problems and some different scares on things like that kind of even come to the forefront for me, where I realize, particularly, like, you just have one thing that doesn't work, whether it's your elbow or your foot or whatever. And it's like the only thing you can focus on. And you never realized you never use that thing like all the time, all the time. And so I think that's a focus. I mean, when we're talking to our kids around our family values, with the kids are, be happy, be healthy, be respectful, be responsible, and be kind. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking, to the kids around, I try to, not have a lot of rules, but focus on the values. So if you ever want to see me get angry, it's when they are, not healthy, not respectful, and not responsible or not kind. But if we're talking about, hey, bud, like, like you can't have 4 cookies, right? That's an arbitrary rule. Versus like, hey, bud, like 4 cookies is not healthy. And my son last night, he came home from finals. He was like exhausted. My wife's cooking dinner. He's like having a sugar like withdrawal meltdown. I think like, he's so hungry, teenage boy right before dinner. And she's like, please don't go eat bowls of cereal, before dinner. It's going to be ready in 10 minutes. And mine was sort of, again, that explain. I was like, look, if you go eat all of the sugar, you're going to have like it's not going to solve your famish problem. Like if you're going to eat something, have some protein, like try to actually, solve the problem. So that's a lot of sort of how I try to talk to my kids around those things. That's an example where our family values don't mimic my personal values, but they're aligned. And I think I never understood from a young age why people would do things that would destroy their health and how they felt. And it probably ties to those other things. I can't, at the times where I haven't felt good, I can't do any of the other things I want to do.
Yeah. So it's more of a personal capability.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your third value?
So as we talked about, find a better way, health and vitality, self-reliance. So I have been like, this has been since I was little. And it's always been very important to me. Like I have if it's meant to be, it's up to me. I had to unlearn some of that in an organization and delegation otherwise, but like, I am the guy, like I will drive myself home from the hospital unless they tell me that I can't. Like, I don't like to ask people to do things that I can do myself. I like figuring it out. I like solving it. It doesn't mean I don't like people and being part of a team, but my default is like, I'll take care of it if I need to. And by the way, I very much struggle with people who are dependent, whether that's financially or otherwise. You want to say a kryptonite is someone who can't do anything and doesn't try. The thing in my family, it drives me nuts. I always say, like, you're good looking, but bad lookers. Like, they look for something for 30 seconds and then they ask for help, and it drives me crazy. I'm like, look for it yourself for 5 minutes. And then if you can't find it, I'll come help you. But you're asking me to do it rather than you doing the work. Like, that's just a small example of like when people look for something for 10 seconds and then they say they can't find it. When I can't find something, I look for it for an hour before I ask someone to. I just think you should try to do the best yourself before you ask someone else to do your work.
Reconcile that again a little bit, because again, I very much resonate with you.
Yeah.
And yet I know that sometimes in a relationship, especially, I mean, how does that pan out with your wife, for instance? Because or a business partner or something like that. Because I've done that sometimes and left somebody feeling like, dude, you don't need anyone or need me or want me, and this doesn't work out. So I've had to grapple with it a little bit. Yeah,
like all these things are strengths overused equals a weakness. And so, yes, particularly in building a team and delegating it, it's sort of, I want people who are resilient and self-reliant, and I want to be around them. So I resonate really well with people like that. And we're willing to, like, I don't want to fly a plane. Like, I want competent pilots to fly a plane who are, confident and in control and are sure of themselves. So I think it just sort of, it manifests in the type of people I want to be around who, well, they may not be that degree of self-reliant. And again, in a relationship, we rely on each other and we have to do things. But I'm not good at asking other people to do things for me. I mean, that is not my natural state, but I have to do it sometimes. And so I've learned that. Like, it pains me to ask someone to do something that I know is not fun for them and that they won't enjoy, and they're sort of doing it as a favor. And I also don't love doing that in reverse, because I'm like, it's funny. I don't mind helping people if they really need it. But when they ask for help because they're too lazy to do it, drives me crazy.
Well, I like also that you said you just enjoy doing it alone, because I do resonate with that I enjoy figuring it out. Asking somebody is almost like it feels like a boring shortcut. I like figuring it out. Now, not to the detriment of an initiative or to somebody else, but left to myself, it's fun. It's fun to MacGyver.
Look, those combine for me. Find a better way. Like, so every Black Friday, I have a list of all the things like broken in the house. So we needed a new keypad on the door. We needed a camera in the back. Our locks were 10 years old. And like, I spent the next Saturday, like installing all this stuff and putting it in. And like, I really enjoy that. Like, it's both, I'm doing it myself. I'm watching the videos. I'm figuring it out. And my wife jokes, you never got any praise as a kid. So you're so busy like slapping yourself on the back. But that isn't a little true. So that's a mechanism of I actually think it's better that I figured out how to self sort of soothe. I felt out how to feel good about my own efforts rather than needing external validation, which seems to be the default mode these days, which is no one can get any enjoyment about a job well done unless other people tell them that it's well done. But it's funny, like she was like, oh, you're doing one of your days, and I installed like 30 things that day and fixed everything, and like I loved that day. I like doing that.
I what you just said, the affirmation validation, I struggle with. I recently did a show, one of my shorts, on just kind of the pondering of, would you do it if you could get no credit? Yeah. And I have to look at that even in myself. Would I do that thing, even if it's for my family? Would I do it am I doing it for their appreciation or affirmation, or would I do it on my own?
And I would say this generation that's grown up with front-facing cameras and social media, you see a sunset and you take a picture of yourself in front of the sunset. Like, it's just, I think this is the biggest thing that they are being stripped of in their life, is that intrinsic motivation and intrinsic enjoyment of a job well done. Like, you'll see me high-fiving myself and slapping. Like, when I figured out this faucet after 20 minutes, I was like, I'm good. Like, but I don't need anyone else to get that enjoyment. I'm not saying I enjoy doing things with a team and otherwise, but I can also like do that. I think that's actually that's some healthiness to that.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you mentioned the team thing. And this is something that I wish I could give this lady credit. I think she was on one of my shows a long time ago, but she was talking about collaboration, which has always been a sensitive issue around me because it seems like I don't collaborate. But she said, I've got a business, I've got a team. Do I collaborate? Sure. I don't do everything, but the role that I do, I want to do by myself. I don't want to do it hand-holding with somebody else. She says, I've got other people who are on my team, and their role, they may do it in unison with somebody else, and they like to collaborate that way. I don't. I like to do my thing autonomously. But as a whole, we're collaborating. I've never really heard it talked about like that since then, but I thought,
and it depends on what the role is, right? I think like if your role is to be a visionary in the organization, then you're trying to create the story and the goal and the thing that everyone wants to rally around and be involved with. If 3 people are trying to create the vision, it probably doesn't work very well. But a vision wouldn't be very fun unless you got everyone bought into it and working towards it and synchronizing, as you said, right? So that's what I enjoy. I enjoy thinking of these things or picking these things or putting a line in the sand and kind of rallying other people and working with them to move towards it. I don't necessarily just want to go on the journey by myself, but I might be the one who sort of crystallizes the sort of flagpole.
It's so funny. I'm just laughing. I had a guy, a mobile mechanic, come out and finally fix my Jeep so I could plow our snow out here.
Yeah.
And I really feel proud of myself for finding the guy, but I didn't do it. I don't do carburetors. I hired that out. So, we got to
look, there's nothing I enjoy more than the 8 guys with the leaf blowers on their back forming a wall in the fall. And like, I used to do that in my 20s, and like, and doing all those leaves, because I actually know I can't do it better than them. I don't have the equipment. It's a numbers and equipment game. So I am very happy to watch them do that.
Yeah. I have other things I'd rather do. All right. 4th value. What was that?
Respectful authenticity. And this is sort of a unique one. I find a lot of people have, like, when we try to do it, they try to say integrity. And I have a specific, I'm always like, what does that mean? Integrity. When you say your value is integrity, I've heard 5 different definitions of integrity or more. Some people it's telling the truth. Some people it's doing what they say what they do. Other people it's, living in accordance with, what they were think they're supposed to be doing. There's all kinds of things. There's cultural variations. There are cultures where it is integral to rat on your family, and it's very unintegral to rat on your family, right? So that's not a universal value. I tend to think that what a lot of people really mean is some authenticity, right? But I also like these more specific descriptors. So for me, and my whole book 2 weeks notice, rethinking 2 weeks notice was actually based on this value of respectful authenticity. I family core value of respect. I really like the thing that drives me nuts is disrespect. We chat about a story where I blurted out at a soccer game at a kid who was being very disrespectful.
Yeah.
But also I think what's unique about is this matrix of also being authentic. So I'm the person that like, I'm the person that will tell you the truth. But I really try to never like be disrespectful of people, but in an honest way. When you call all your friends and you're like, should I do this or this? And you just want the advice like that you want to hear from all of them. When you call me, I'm the one who's going to be like, look, I think like, I think this is what you want to hear, but it's not what you want to hear. It's not what you want to hear. Yeah. So that's always been something I've been able to do is particularly in the workplace is try to have these conversations. And the whole thing of our company of eliminating 2 weeks notice was like, how do we treat people better by having real conversations and trying to get to better outcomes? And so this is the one I think it's always been, I really liked getting the wording right because it's sort of uniquely me. Like, I don't want to be in environments where authentic means that, I'm destroying people and making them unhappy. But also, being respectful doesn't mean you kind of lie to people and tell them what they want to hear.
It's a big one for me, Robert, because I've done that. I'm going to be respectful, but I'm not authentic. Then on the other side, I feel like we got this culture who so wants to be authentic. Can I just be raw and you love me? I think, no, you're being an ass.
Yeah, so, that's Kim Scott's radical candor. A lot of people confuse radical candor with obnoxious aggression. Like that's not radical candor is high support, high challenge, which to me is very similar to respectful authenticity.
I agreed. And if the authenticity is not respectful, I don't want it. But I fell on the other side of being respectful, but I'm not being honest. And that causes distance and division on us. Well, it did for me.
And look, this is one of the authenticity part is my big thing. Like I can be friends with a wide, variety of people, but they just need to be consistent between what they think and what they say and what they do. So, if someone's I'm just giving you an example, but like if someone's in a open marriage and they both are, and like, but I don't agree with that, like, great. Like I can hang out with them, whatever. When they are having multiple affairs and espousing marriage, like that stuff just drives me crazy. The glass ceiling folks. And so I've actually learned to be attuned. And I think, Warren Buffett once said, when the tide goes out, you notice who's not wearing their bathing suit. And the last 4 years, I think, as the capital has gone out, you've seen a lot of people. I have had a lot of not blow-ups because it was me, but really surprised people who were very strongly espousing one thing or another, and then it turned out that, or telling people to emulate them and how they were leading or how they were running their business or how they, and to turn out that not be true, and that's sort of like unrecoverable for me, from those people.
Oh, it's interesting as a podcaster. I mean, you're in a glass house and we're sitting here talking, and I may have a spouse or a child or somebody hear this, so I can't BS it. They know.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And again, it's just our Gandhi said happiness is what when you think, say, and do are aligned. Right. And I always say like that to me, that's a great culture at a company. When what people actually think is what they say and what they're doing. I know a lot of people who are tortured. It's like, we all have family members in this bucket or otherwise where it's like, they don't mean what they just said. Like, like, it. Like, and it's like, and it's like, you that's sort of, that's why passive aggressiveness is my least favorite thing. I'm fine with open aggressiveness. I'm fine with people who are just say what they mean and say how they feel and tell you, I'm much better off with that than I am with passive aggressiveness.
So just to go back to the story, you spend 6 months. These are the 4 core values you come up with.
I have one more, although because I better way is 5. I generally think 3 to 4 good. The last one's long-term orientation. And that's another thing I can point to I married my high school girlfriend. There's so many, kept my cars for 10 years. Like what's interesting is I'm very impatient in the short term about action. That's the better way. But I very much play the long game around the things that I'm working towards. So I'm happy to play the 5-year long game or state, but I need to see movement towards that. So that was always, my role in the company was to focus on what we were going to do next and write the 5-year plan. And I'm really good at seeing around corners. In fact, one of the things I learned in business over the years is I was so good at seeing around corners that people wouldn't believe me because I was too far around the corner, and I had to wait a lot of times until the little bit of the lights, because I'd be like, "Look, this problem is coming. We are going to have this problem." They're like, "We don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're crazy." I'm like, "I can see it." And they're like, "Where's the proof?" I'm like, I'm telling you." Like, and then I learned to wait a little bit and wait until the lights from the train were coming around the corner, and then say, "Look, I think we're about to have a problem with this." And I'm wrong on a lot of things, but I'm more often right than not about some of these kind of seeing around the corner things.
So to take those 5 values, would it be relevant to say those are your filters that you hold up, and those are what dictates a hard word, but those are what dictate what you do, one, and what role you fulfill. Let's look at business. What you're going to be involved in, what initiatives, and what role you will fulfill in those.
Yeah. And so when I figured these out, I came back, and you could look at community, but let's just look at dimensions of business, personal, and family. Because I like the business, personal, family, community. So my business, I went and augmented our core values and doubled down on things. And we ended up trading out a lot of people who weren't on board with the values. And then we started kind of taking off. So I went and doubled down. Personally, I started setting goals and focusing on things and the book I wanted to write and sort of figuring it out and kind of doubling down on relationships. So, and these are the relationships I need to exit because they really don't like match with my values and serve that. And that's a whole topic. I love talking about energy vampires. I think, you got to let go of the energy vampires in your life, or at least stop feeding them. Family, another thing. I said, look, I am the best parent I can be when I am doubling down on these values. When I'm working with my kids on our family values, or on a long-term project, or on a ropes course, or figuring out something. One of the things I stopped doing in the family, I gave up back to school night. Again, I was that ADD kid. I couldn't sit in the class. I hated back to school night. My wife really enjoys it. I'm sitting in the class, not paying attention in the little chair. It's like a bad flashback for me to being in school, listening to the same speech every year. I hate repetition. And I was like, this doesn't make me a better parent. Like, so I'm going to give up the guilt. Like, I stopped going to back to school night, and I was like, I'm going to make time and take time to do these other things with my kids. We're going to run races together, all things that, really align with my values. And I'm not going to worry about these other things. And I'm going to so in all these areas, it's like, where are you going to double down and where are you going to quit? Because it's not about just doing more. In fact, if you did it all right, you'd probably net do less if you understand the 80-20 rule and just focus on the things that are most aligned.
I appreciate that. With the number of kids that I have and the different activities, I'm kind of at the hell yes or hell no.
Yeah.
So
I love that phrase.
Yeah. I've gone to the last 2 nights of them, and tonight's I'm not going. So I'm with you. I'll be thinking about you. With the podcast, we've been promoting that on our show, I've been talking about it. With that, you have guests on, and you say, that it's even when we first talked, that it's a business focus. And I get that. So you got a lot of people on there, the same self-help folks that I do. And
it's interesting. I always have half of people's guests, because if people say, what is the show? I'm like, well, it's kind of like if Tim Ferriss met Guy Raz, like on How I Built This, because I think like they tend to be CEOs and company leaders or high level leaders, and they're people looking to build their business, but they're building it through getting better and personal development and capacity building. And so the guests are either experts in their domain, or they're the CEO and leader of an organization that's actually done it. And so a lot of people have kind of one group or the other. I've sort of put together a mix of people who say, look, I either want to hear from the person that done it. Like I have Jesse Cole of the Savannah Bananas on again last week. Like he's just done he's like a business school lesson. He is far more serious than you would perceive as a business kind of scholar looking at how he appears externally with his yellow tux and stuff. But then you have Angela Duckworth on talking about like what are models for resilience and grit and when do you quit and not quit. So I think it appeals to that sort of person who's looking to get better both inside of their business and out of it.
Well, man, I love the story and hearing the background. And I feel like that's what, as a host, that it's host centric. People listen to people that they trust and they resonate with. And I resonate with you more now that I've heard your story. And thanks. I'm looking forward. I happen to know some of your upcoming ventures that I'm eager to. You'll have to come back. For one,
we'll come back when the core values book will release later towards the end of next year, and I think it's in the form of sort of a Patrick Lencioni parable. So I think that it's a great way to get the message to people in a way that they sort of see it, because they're like, why do I need that? What are core values? Whatever. But like once you see it, you see this character like trying to figure out whether he's in the right relationship, in the right job, in the right community. I think it'll strike some chords for people, and then they're like, okay, I want to understand this.
I'm certain. Well, I was reading it this morning, and the way that you did it, I could see, oh my gosh, this is what we do. This is the stuff that almost all of us do, that we fall into and we miss it. And I love how you're bringing it out. So yeah, well, we'll as soon as it's out, as soon as you're ready, we'll have you back. Man, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing what you're doing to find how to make things better and share it. It is near and dear to my heart. And I'm grateful to benefit, man. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks for having me. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you as well these past few weeks and months.
Friends, thanks for joining us on this drive. Again, that is Robert Glazer, Glazer. You can find him at robertglazer.com. Right now, where you're listening to your podcast, I would encourage you to check out his Elevate podcast. Again, a lot of similarities to this show, more of a business focus. So a lot of you guys will enjoy it for that purpose. And then at his website, his Friday Forward newsletter has really made him popular in essence. And I've been getting that for weeks now. Got a question or comment for either of us? You can find me at kevinmiller.co. Until next time, I hope that this episode helps you drive further and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Yeah.